SaaS Backwards is sponsored by Austin Lawrence Group, specializing in demand gen for SaaS. It sure is noisy. I deleted 100 emails from vendors just this morning. Your buyer has gotten better at ignoring you, and you're gonna need a big idea if you want to cut through all that clutter. Austin Lawrence is just the right agency to help you find it. So if your campaigns are falling on deaf eyeballs, let's talk. Visit austinlawrence.com today and let's build something bigger.
Welcome to the SaaS Backwards podcast, where we reverse engineer the success of fast-growing SaaS firms and explore strategies CMOs and CEOs are using to drive their businesses forward.
Welcome to SaaS Backwards, a podcast that helps SaaS CEOs and CMOs to accelerate growth and enhance profitability. Our guest today is Jeremy Lessaris, a serial founder in fintech and SaaS who's had 8 exits and counting. He's currently founder and CEO of Payment Brokers, which uses machine learning to achieve cost reductions for merchants, and is also a payment tech solutions integrator and developer for ERP and SaaS applications. Hey, Jeremy, welcome to the podcast.
Great to be here today.
Yeah, I'm happy to have you. Before we dig into the stuff we said we'd talk about, could you share a little bit about your background and your company, Payment Brokers? But feel free to share your story, because I think it's a fun and interesting and unusual journey you've been on.
Sure. So serial entrepreneur, built and sold 8 companies. Beyond that, there have been maybe 20 others that I've built. I did most of this while I had a full-time career. So I'm the king of side hustle, and built some successful ones and had some failures along the way. More recently, I've changed direction in terms of how I build companies and in general why I build them. So this last one was more a labor of love of trying to help small business rather than building some tech platform to solve a problem where we charge for it. This is something that I was doing to find cost reduction. So Payment Brokers was really my journey to try to help merchants save money without making changes to the way that they operate on a day-to-day basis. It's become kind of a foundational principle of building things as I move forward, which is how can I help versus what can I build that's focused on profit only. So it's a very unique company. So that's a little bit about my background.
Well, I mean, that's an interesting mission alignment and position to take in business, and maybe even amplifying what we coach clients now to be thinking about in terms of their selling process. That we have to be focused on what we're doing to help clients and prospects more than just trying to sell our product to the ideal customer, right? It's an interesting posture. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? It's not something we prepared on, but I'd love to know more about what the root of that is for you.
Yeah, my journey's different. I think when I first started these companies, it was more about what I was building and the revenue attached to it and how much money I could make and the profitability of those companies. It was really a money approach. Everything was, man, there's a big opportunity and it has a lot of money attached to it, so I'm going to go focus on it. But I lost the creative focus or attachment of purpose. It was just more profit. Everything was money, money. I personally think that a lot of the early founding principles I had was how much money can I make doing this and how fast can I make money doing it? And I think that came from or stemmed from the way I lived. So coming from nothing, I think you get more in a general sense of how do I protect myself? How do I have enough money to uphold the lifestyle I have? And it was really my only target was money. And so as I got past that point, I think you start to look at things a little different. How does this business interact with my lifestyle? How am I going to live while I operate this company? And does it have a purpose bigger than just making money? It is a very dynamic change that's happened gradually. This wasn't like an aha moment. One night I was like, oh, okay, I should do things for purpose, not just for profit, and more dug into the creativity side of me. So I found myself in the last couple of companies I built slowly driving towards purpose. And so if you look at the companies I'm founding now, a lot of it has to do with the things I feel like I can impact for a much bigger purpose. And I'm not really focused on profit or revenue. It was really more if I could design a company that fits me personally and the lifestyle that I want to live and the things I want to create an impact. And I was purely just in a creative state, the profit and the rest of it will follow. And so I have a skill set in the payment side, and I knew I could make an impact and help friends and family. So I had something I could use and turn it into a positive benefit for everyone that I've been introduced to. So that's really a lot of what I've been focused on, is helping small to medium-sized companies and make an impact on things from a tool that I have currently. So very low lift, very big reward. And in general, I can do it virtually. So it fits my lifestyle of being able to travel and have a little bit more time to myself. So this is kind of the thought process of how I build things now, where before it was really purely, hey, this thing's a really cool opportunity. It's going to make a lot of money. I can make a ton of profit. Let's go do that.
And could you give us a little insight into payment brokers itself, what it does and how it impacts your clients? Because it sounds like it's a good thing.
Yeah, it's funny because I almost don't want to talk about it. I mean, I'm happy to talk about it. It's a weird business for me to be in because often if I'm building something, I want to scream it out to the world and get it in front of as many people as possible. And this is the first time I've built something that I don't want to have that much attention, because what we're doing in essence is taking back from the profits of a lot of the big banks and processors. There was actually just an article that came out today that said there's a huge effort that's been going on for a long time to reduce payment-related transaction fees. And even Dick Durbin and others went after Visa and MasterCard, banging down the doors of the credit card brands to try to reduce expenses to small and medium-sized business, because interchange is really high and expensive, right? Everyone's paying 2 and 3% every time they swipe a card. So swipe fees are high. Where I think that they've been barking up the wrong tree is you and I enjoy the 2% cashback rewards. So I don't want to give that up. I think there are a lot of folks who that's their travel for the year. They're like, I'll run up my card here and I'll be top in American Airlines. I can, be one of their top people. And on top of that, I'll get free tickets and free hotel. And so I feel like a lot of the regulators and advocators have been targeting Visa, MasterCard, where a lot of the fees that are burdensome and mostly to small and medium-sized business, I believe it's north of $50 billion a year in the US, has been targeted towards small and medium companies because they don't have sophisticated supply chain people that are doing vendor relations and negotiations every year. They haven't whittled this above interchange fee down to something that's palatable. And the smaller the volume, the less of a fight you have. So I have become an advocate for those folks. And we built a machine learning technology that can detect what is profit and what is expense to the processor. And we take that proprietary data and we utilize it to negotiate on that client's behalf to get them better rates and fees with the existing company that they're with. They don't have to switch processors. They don't have to change their POS systems. They don't have to retrain everybody or reintegrate some technology. And the more that I do this, the more predatory I find the industry. They have embedded themselves through technology. They have made treaties with point of sale systems so that you can't use third parties. They've basically built in a reduction of free market choice, and it's become anti-competitive. So this is my fight to try to help. And I believe we've done a pretty successful job so far to take that data and negotiate on behalf of these companies. So that's part of the reason why we don't want the visibility, because we don't need them to knock down our door to try to take away that power. But I also recognize how bad the problem is. So it's something that we want to get out in front of as many folks as we can to try to help them. And we do that without making any impacts to their day. And it's a very low lift cost reduction exercise. So the bottom line is a cost reduction, and we, in essence, split the savings with our customers.
Cool. I mean, I think the issues that you're addressing are going to be pretty timely, even as we publish this episode, the attention it's getting in Congress. will help spark some debate. So maybe this little bit of the episode can fit in there somewhere.
Today, there was an article that was released, and I would tell you that 4 basis points is what they gave up. Visa, MasterCard said, we believe this is a great settlement. 4 basis points. That's, 0.04% is what they said. We'll give that back. And we believe that's $50 billion back to the merchants, but it's not, because that's interchange. That's just one piece of the pie. And that piece of the pie doesn't make a big impact. What makes an impact is at the processor level, and no one's looking at that side of the fence. So it will be timely to try to help reduce fees. And as you look at this, I hate to say payments have been commoditized, but they have been. They provide an amazing service, and they've made it frictionless now to make a payment. As any operator of a company, the more frictionless the payment is, the better. So I enjoy the benefit of it, the security, the technology, the integration. That's amazing. And I think that has value. But when I see 6% to exchange money, it doesn't have that much value.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've started supporting local merchants who give you a cash differential. So I've actually started my own little movement, or I'm joining that small kind of organic movement.
The problem with that is it doesn't solve the problem. What we're doing is feeding processors more profit. So where we should get these rates down below 2.5% all in, now they're saying you can charge your customer 3%. So we still have 50 basis points floating around on $4 trillion. And I think 2022, it was $10 trillion in credit card transactions. It's a lot of money. So I know it's not a lot, 50 basis points. Not everybody's looking at 0.5%. I am. So that's what we're after.
Well, I think that as an entrepreneur, you have to be willing to look at things that others aren't, right? You have to look at the white space that people haven't seen the problem or built the solution for. And you have a unique kind of point of view. I want to sort of get into some of the other things you've involved yourself with.
Sure.
And it's like you found scale and exit startups maybe a little differently than others. And I was wondering if you could share some of your process and point of view with the listeners.
Sure. I want to start by saying 8 exits doesn't mean they were all good exits. I think in general, people go, wow, you've built and sold 8 companies. Some were out of pure necessity to not have the company go upside down. So when we talk about exiting and building and operating, I think over the years, I found where my niche is, which I'm not a great operator, and my brain is always going towards the next, hey, I can fill this gap, and I believe I can make this technology, and I think I could do this better. And my business continues to change with the voice of the customer. And that sometimes means spin-off companies, which is, if you look at the history of the companies I built, a lot of them, although they don't seem relevant to each other, often have some guiding principle to where I landed in the next venture. And what I found is that for me, and this is just for me personally, I'm not a great operator. I'm a great builder, and I can get things to revenue, but I don't want to do the same function every day over and over for a decade. I did that in my career. So while I had a career, I was like, this is the one thing that I could have wings with, because I already had roots in a career where I was a VP of marketing for a huge publicly traded company. I had to do the same thing over and over again. And I had deep roots in my career, but I had wings in entrepreneurship to build things that I believed had bigger value to an operator who couldn't build it fast enough. So I just had the agility to build things quicker and get them to revenue and profitability in a bootstrap environment, which has huge potential for exit at 4 to 10x of what it would take me to then operate that company for 10 years. Why would I take that level of execution risk for 10 years, especially in technology that moves at the speed that most people can't even think at? So it's really difficult for me to say, hey, I think I can operate this company for the next 10 years and it'll grow 10% a year. Or I found an operator who has 10x value in buying this asset from me, and I don't have to. So I was fast forwarding time by taking these exits at some point after I've gotten them to revenue and profitability that I felt was enough to have an exit. And then I just learned the process of exiting, which was amazing to me. So I focused a lot of energy on building things I knew could fill a gap in a market with well-known operators that were in the M&A mode, right?
There's a lot to unpack there. First of all, knowing what you're good at and honoring that in yourself. Not everybody does want to operate a business, and also not everybody can create something from nothing. We certainly speak to a lot of CEOs who came in after the fact, right? They were brought in by the founders. But I think it's great to just be clear on where your strengths are. Some people are great at originating an idea. Some people are great at operating. Some people are great at rescuing and turning around.
I would say the thing that was helpful, not to pitch or promote this, but I believe early on, I had amazing mentors, not paid mentorships, although I wish I had invested more early on in having a variety of mentors that could help me go through these iterations in my brain. Those guiding moments made huge impacts on how I built things moving forward. So I was fortunate to have natural mentorships just so happened to take me under their wing and give me all of these amazing insights that I just wouldn't have had myself. So investing in having not only just mentorships, but guidance and groups. And I think that would have made a huge impact earlier on for me to identify the things I was good at, because I think people think they know what they're good at. And it's hard to do, I'll call it shadow work. It's hard to do the heavy lift of saying, I'm just not going to be good at that, because entrepreneurs have to be good at everything all the time, right? You have to learn all of these things, but it's where you start putting more focus into a topic or an area. I used somewhat of an emotional guidance system to say, I don't really enjoy that. So I don't want to put a ton of effort and energy into that thing. Sometimes you have to do the thing you don't want to do. I mean, that's part of entrepreneurship. There's no easy route. But I was on a call recently and someone asked me, and it may have been another podcast. Someone asked me, well, how do you know that that's the thing you should focus energy on? Like, there's so many things to target. Should I take public speaking classes to go speak more? It's like, if that's what you want to be a part of the chapter that you're writing, then yes. So thinking from the end result of what you're building and how you're going to operate and what your lifestyle looks like at the end of the story is just as important as the things you're doing on a day-to-day, because you can't be an expert at all things. There are some people who naturally have a gift to be an operator and an ideator and a CRO, and they can do all of the above. That's great, but that's rare. And I also hate that I come on and talk about building so many things, because most people just need to focus on the one thing that they have in front of them instead of doing what I did, which was building a million things. I think I may have had a very different result if I put 100% of myself into one thing. So maybe lessons learned, I wouldn't have done it that way.
Actually, I have a question that I want to ask you.
Sure.
You mentioned that part of this journey happened while you were working for another company, right? You had a full-time job. And was that something you had to negotiate, or was it just totally on your own time, evenings and weekends, and didn't impact? Because that's not an uncommon entrepreneur's kind of origin, right? I
100%.
moonlit, I did it on weekends. So what was that part of your journey?
I'm the king of side hustles. I always had a job, and whether it was permissible or not, I was building. And so I would come home and burn through the midnight hour to build whatever crazy idea I had in my pocket at the moment. But what I found was, when I went into the last career I had, which was in manufacturing, I was fortunate that the founders of that organization were really entrepreneurial and really took me under their wing to allow me to do those things until the company went public, and then things got really difficult. You can't really juggle all of those things simultaneously. I was even fortunate to be able to build things with those founders, which was amazing outside of my career working in that organization. So I was fortunate to have a career that allowed me to do those things. So I was able to work on them almost simultaneously. But even before that, there was always something for me to focus on outside of work. So instead of coming home and sitting and turning on Netflix, which didn't exist back then, I was grinding out all night. I was shipping packages until 2 a.m. I was getting up at 4:30 so that I could get to the UPS store when they opened to drop off a truckload of products that I had sold on eBay or whatever I was doing to build. There was something beyond just my day. And I sacrificed friendships, going out on weekends, parties, all of the things that I wanted to do and focused in on building. So I did that for 20 years, burning both ends of the candle. It's not without some regret there that I wish I would have had a bit more balance, but it brought me to where I'm at now. So it's hard to tell entrepreneurs now because I'm not a fan of rise and grind. I know it's something you have to do, but there's a smarter way to do this. It should be rise in mind. Like think about how you do this better, brute force work. Because I took the brute force path. I was like, I'll just wake up earlier. I'll just put in an extra hour. I'll just do it myself. And I wish I would have teamed up and had invested in more mentorships and given me better direction along the way on how I could have done things better versus just me trying to do all the work myself. Yeah.
I think it's a fair point. We all also are products of how we grew up. And listen, I was the 13-year-old kid grinding it out too.
Going from the survivalist mentality, which is where I came from. I grew up in a very, very humble beginning. So I had this survivalist mentality, which I was indoctrinated with from family, right? That's how they were. That's how I had to be. But there was a point where I broke rank and said, this is not how it works. I see others having balance and a decent quality of life, and they're ultra successful people. So I can have both. And so the second an entrepreneur tells you they can't, they can't. So it's a matter of just making the investment to be able to do both. Now I'm overbalancing. This is a Libra scales thing where you're running from one side to the other. There's no balance. It's just centering it. So now I'm doing the opposite. Where can I be more balanced? How can I have more time? Because the impacts are so much greater when it comes from a place of being thoughtful in the way you build things versus being so money or dollars and cents focused and so logical focused. You sometimes lose sight of why you were doing it.
I talk about with people, my kids and others who I talk about these kind of decisions, I talk about manifestation, right? You have to manifest that future you want. Otherwise it happens to you. So I think that's the takeaway here, right? Is manifest the kind of future and life you really want to live. I want to turn you into some of the harder points here we talked about before. And this ideation process and linking on past things you've built, you've had some really kind of crazy startups. And I don't mean crazy like bad. I mean like crazy, like amazing thought process that became a business. The one that comes to my mind, I don't know how good an exit it was for you, was that speed control for the power boats. And yeah. I just kind of think it's fun for people to get a sense of how to take an interest and make a business out of it and get it to an exit.
I was a partner in a bigger group that developed that technology. And I would say when you see and identify these gaps. So one of the founders of the companies was on a golf outing and they were talking with a world champion water skier. His name was Andy Mapple. And during that conversation, he said, there's no way that water skiing is ever going to be an Olympic sport. And so all of the problems come up. So when you hear these big gaps, well, there's a driver involved and you have to be able to keep speed perfect. And then it's a matter of taking all of these tools you have and you build this puzzle of how do I fill that gap? So it was really a unique process to have already been in the telematics business where they're doing very high precision GPS triangulation and being in the generator business, making gensets for hospitals that have regulations about throttle control and taking those two pieces and marrying them together in saying, could we regulate speed based on location? And if we had both, could you have a GPS speed control? So I think the ideation process that I was introduced to for that business is what born so many other things after. So I was fortunate enough to be involved in that company. My mind in that business was more marketing. How do we get this thing off the ground? How do we get all of these tournaments to adopt this technology? How do we step in from a OEM equipment manufacturing side to get them to adopt this at an OEM level versus a retrofit level? So there was a lot more for me on the marketing side for that business and less on the product development side. There were some absolute genius people who worked on the software and the hardware. So a lot of that is having the right people and pulling all of these resources together to get an idea off the ground. And a prototype was built and they rented a car and put this technology together and literally bootstrapped it to make it work and drove a car around the parking lot and was able to regulate the speed. And so the idea was born. And this is something that I use now for everything. How do we get to revenue before we have product? So we were pre-selling the concept to retail before we even had a product. We were taking orders. So this is like the original crowdfunding idea. And I would say that there's oftentimes I meet founders who have a really great idea and their first idea is like, how do I raise capital? And that's where I feel like you don't even have an idea yet. And your first thought is, I need to raise money. So I have, in all of the businesses, most of which have been bootstrapped, I always looked for the first path to revenue with the lowest amount of lift. So what can I build quickly that gets me to revenue, even if it was, and this is just, I'm throwing this out there as an idea, I didn't actually do this, but if I wanted to create that product and I didn't have enough capital to do it, why wouldn't I build some kind of training application for those people who use speed control until I get something off the ground and make enough money to fund my first speed control development? It's the way that I operate most of my companies is get to market with something, test and validate that market and see if it actually makes sense. Because every company I've started has dynamically changed in a very short period of time. So I see people just throwing money at, let's go develop this thing. We're not 100% sure what people are willing to pay for it. But you hear about product market fit and all of these things. It's like, go pull the trigger, put it out there, see if they garner enough interest and investors will show up at the door. You won't even have to say, how do I raise capital? If I had a product idea and I had 25,000 people that said, here's my credit card number, I'll buy it now, it's easy to go raise capital. If you say, hey, I'd like to spend $250,000 to build something and I think I can go sell people, really hard to raise capital. So most of my business ideas now are really fast to market, very short cycle to revenue without a lot of capital to get it off the ground. And then once I prove that, then I can expand on that idea. And you learn so much about the voice of your customer that way. It's just a different way to build things. And so that's worked for me. That doesn't work for everything. You can't build some AI technology on a whim that you're going to like piecemeal your way there. It's either there or you don't have it. There are models that require capital, but I would say there's still a model of funding it all the way up the chain and learning about the customers along the way. And that's ultimately the model that I've used to build a lot of these companies.
Is there any publicly available resource on bootstrapping you'd recommend to would-be entrepreneurs?
Nothing that I've listened to or read, which is funny because I listen to a lot of books and I've not really listened to anything on bootstrapping now that you're saying that. It's an interesting mix. There's definitely a point in which you go raise capital. I get it. There's a necessity for it, very much in the sense of companies that go public. Sometimes companies go public for different reasons. Like I want to sell to 50 blue chip companies. It's much easier to sell to 50 blue chip companies when your financials are public. So going public isn't always about raising capital and doing M&A, and there could be a myriad of reasons to do that. The same for raising capital, and founders end up in a bad situation, especially those who only have one idea and it's a great idea. And their first out of the gate is let's go raise capital, which you can do, but then you lose the value of that idea and you become an employee in that company. And so it's been my goal to help startups get to a point of revenue and profitability so that at least they have a valuation when they do it. At least they can retain some equity, this crazy idea that they've poured the rest of their life into, because that's what you're going to have to do to get it off the ground.
Well, maybe we have your next startup for you. It's the Bootstrap Entrepreneur Lab or something.
Yeah, it's a running joke, but now it's actually not funny anymore. We've been talking about launching, I think it was idea killers or idea crushers or dream crushers. I really think every entrepreneur should go through this cycle of having a panel of extremely dialed in experts crush them because they need to hear it. I feel like there's a lot of tiptoeing and there's a lot of false prophets out there selling, let me show you how to do this and let me teach you and train you. And it's rare when you find people that can actually mentor you through methodically. And it's important for them to be able to adopt that stuff slowly and understand it and actually utilize it. Not here's an ebook and then here's my course. And I feel like they just burn through a lot of that stuff and they end up in a bad situation anyway. So it'd be nice to just have, hey, just do a roundtable with us. We'll crush your idea. It's terrible, but it's also super helpful because you go back and need to answer those questions to yourself, not to the panel. So I've been fortunate that I've had these dream crushers in my journey who have said, this is not going to work. And here's why. Or technology wise, there's no feasibility to this. And here's why. So, I mean, you start to build up that understanding early on and you can kill these ideas off much sooner. I wish I would have done that with a couple of them, but didn't have the same group.
Fair enough. One last thing I want to touch on briefly in the process of being able to sell your business. Let's talk a little bit about what the books and records of these companies need to look like and their contracts and stuff like that. Not enough entrepreneurs focus on building their business for sale, and that's been a big part of what you do.
Yeah. So start from scratch. Go research what a data room is because you're going to need one at closing. And for your own sake of organization, just organize files and documents and agreements. Keep a record of your P&Ls. And if you're not immediately organized with your books, you're going to have a total nightmare. More recently, I've been fortunate to have had a really great CPA group that have kept me super organized along the way. So I think that's something that needs to happen day one, and build a dashboard for yourself right out of the gate. It doesn't have to be a sophisticated one, but it needs to be metrics that make sense for the business. And the sooner you can build that, the more data you have to make decisions on a day-to-day basis. It's the same thing that the investment group that's going to buy you for 50x wants to see. They want to know what you want to know are the KPIs for growth and success. So doing that day one isn't a heavy lift. So starting by organizing things and having things in an environment that you can keep very clean and make it very simple to just make sure you file it away in this organized fashion is not hard to do. And what I find is that when I invest in companies and you start going through this, you're like, you don't even know how bad it is. You said profit. And then when we start digging into a P&L, you're like, when did you start this? And it's usually like, well, we started it now because we need to raise money. So you don't even know the health of your own company. You're an investor in your own company. You should think like an investor when you start. You're investing your time, sweat, blood, tears, whatever you have into it. So being organized and having access to that stuff early on just helps. And it doesn't have to be this expensive, like you don't need like Power BI or some crazy big analytics tool. There are really low cost systems out there like Zoho. There's a million CRM platforms that are $50 or $60 a month that have all inclusive tools like this that you can use to just get a litmus test of the health of the company. And having a good CPA firm to classify and categorize and organize the way you look at your business is just as important. So doing that upfront, very low lift, doing it a year and a half into the business when things are chaotic, you won't have 2 minutes left in your day to do it. So I would say start by organizing it so that when it comes time for exit, there's nothing better than to say, well, here's my data room. They're like, wait, what do you mean? Here's a dashboard that of all my KPIs and metrics for my company. It would floor them. It gives you a higher valuation in turn too, because they don't have all this diligence work that they would traditionally go through. So if you have a real business, it's worth having this. It makes a massive difference on the time it takes to close these deals and the valuation you get in the end.
That's a great place to land. And just add also, make sure your contracts are good and that all your clients are working from the same kind of agreements.
That one's tough. Legal is so hard.
It is hard, but you know, a software company, by the time you really get up and running, you should be able to get certainly all your new clients. And if you're 3 or 4 years into it, the last year and a half or 2 years, everybody should be on a current agreement.
Yeah, I mean, you can harmonize stuff longer term as long as you get clauses in to be able to do that on an ongoing basis. And it's not like you're not going after these companies that need MSA, like these big master service agreements signed. And Like there's a point of exhaustion with legal. And I can tell you, I've burned some companies down just spending so much money trying to get it right in terms of what I want in and the borderline of like what's too much and what's too little. It's tough. That's a tough hurdle. And I think every deal would be very different there. Contracts can be harmonized longer term. It's just spending a lot of legal money up front it's challenging on a startup.
This has been a really far-ranging and a personal conversation that I really appreciate you sharing with our listeners. And if folks want to reach out to you to get a little bit of mentorship or advice or learn more about your approach to business, how can people get a hold of you?
I'm on almost every social channel, but you can go on jeremylessaris.com and starting to post a lot of my interviews and articles and other things that are helpful as well. I don't consult. This is just purely me getting out and networking, meeting great people like you, Ken. So I'm happy to connect with people on LinkedIn as well.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate that. If you haven't subscribed to our podcast yet, SaaS Backwards, please do so wherever podcasts are distributed. I can be reached on LinkedIn/in/Ken Lempet. And my demand generation agency for SaaS is Austin Lawrence, and we're at austinlawrence.com. Hey, Jeremy, thanks so much for being an amazing guest on SaaS Backwards. Really appreciate your time today.
Likewise, it was great to meet you and hang out.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for listening to the SaaS Backwards podcast, brought to you by Austin Lawrence Group. We're a growth marketing agency that helps SaaS firms reduce churn, accelerate sales, and generate demand. Learn more about us at www.austinlawrence.com. You can email Ken Lempet at kl@austinlawrence.com about any SaaS marketing or customer retention subject. We hope you'll subscribe, and thanks again for listening.